Hello, investors. This is Todd Thomas, Associate Portfolio Manager with Revere Asset Management. Today is Saturday, May 17th at 8:47 a.m., coming to you from Boca Raton, Florida, to bring you the Revere Roundup Weekend Walkthrough. Well, we continued with the we upgraded everything to the 3 green up arrows this week compared to last week. Last week we still had a green sub arrow on the medium term. However, we did gap open on both major indexes above the 200-day moving average on Monday as a result of positive trade development with China on Sunday night. We also have a sub green arrow on the 200-day moving average. The indexes both closed above the 200-day every single day of the week with a high close on Friday. So with follow through next week, we could possibly raise this and now be at the 4 coveted green arrows. However, we'll go over some of the recent developments that may prevent or stop the progress in the market. First of all, going over last week, on Monday, the indexes gapped open above the 200-day moving average on surprise developments in the trade talks in Geneva, Switzerland with China. Both indexes are now approximately 3% on the S&P and 5% on the NASDAQ from their all-time respective highs. Economic-wise, consumer and producer inflation showed a cooling trend last week. Retail sales growth was modest, but March's provisions were quite huge to the upside. The Philly Fed Manufacturing Index was less negative also. On the biggest news of the week, the Saudi Public Investment Fund signed deals with AMD and NVIDIA to buy hundreds of thousands of advanced processors for AI data centers with proposed capacity of 500 megawatts over the next 5 years. Also, SMCI inked a deal to supply systems to DataVolt's hyperscale campus in Saudi and the U.S. valued at $20 billion, which is almost as much as their market capitalization. Also, IBD Market School Power Trend kicked in on Friday, which we talked about on Friday's podcast. So if you'd like more details on that, please see our podcast on Friday. And also this week, Trump's landmark spending reconciliation bill failed to pass the House Budget Committee, with 5 Republicans breaking ranks and voting against it because of the long-term debt issues. Also, we note that next vote is Sunday night at 10 p.m. So we could see whether the House passes this on Sunday night. And as a result, the U.S. loses its last perfect credit rating from Moody's, which it held in 2017, which it held since 1917, from their highest AAA rated to AA1. They warned in 2023 that the rating was at risk. Also want to note that Fitch downgraded this rating in 2023, and S&P Global did it in 2011. So the market was down pretty big on the initial one in 2011, but the 2023 was short-lived, and many people believe that this is pretty much a nothing burger and was expected, but it may provide an excuse to get a pullback in the market early next week. Also, Moody maintained that the U.S. retains exceptional credit strength, such as its size, resilience, and dynamism, and the continued role as the U.S. dollar as a global reserve currency. Notable earnings winners were SE, ONON, Axcelis, BE, Cisco, Nextracker, and Shopify. I think I'm missing one there, which I'll get to in the watch list. As a result of the debt downgrade, this is the SPY ETF. This is the aftermarket. Here's a close at 1600 hours, and finally trading stops at around 6 o'clock p.m. We gave back pretty much all the gains from yesterday in the aftermarket and closed into Thursday's levels. So about 0.5%, 0.6% drop initially on this. The TLT, the bond market, yields went higher, and this retraced most of Friday and Thursday's recovery. So that's the initial reaction so far. On the week, the biggest standouts were the semiconductors on the Saudi deal, with NVIDIA gaining 16% and Broadcom up almost 10%, as well as AMD up 13%. Of the Magnificent Seven, Tesla was a standout, up 17.3% as it continued to make ground above its 200-day moving average. And General Electric was a standout, and Boeing continued its gains on additional contracts throughout the week. Beer and Cat were up on earnings this week, and United Healthcare was down 23% on an investigation in Medicare fraud, as well as the CEO stepping down last week or the week before. So otherwise, a slight up week on everything else. The S&P was up 5%. The Qs were up almost 7%. Dow, with being weighed down by UNH, was only up 3.4%. Equal weight was up 4.3%. Semiconductor index, the SOXX, was up almost 10%. And gold miners were down 8%. Gold stepped back 4%, closed out its 50-day moving average, and silver down 1.6%. Otherwise, bonds slightly down on the week, meaning yields were higher. Mid caps reclaimed the 200-day moving average, up almost 5% on the week. And the Russell 2000 was up. The TNA, which is the leverage, was up 13%. IWM was up 3.8%. Earnings are winding down. This is this week's earnings. Again, there's a handful coming out. The notable ones are Home Depot, Palo Alto Networks, Toll Brothers in the housing space, Target, TJX, in retail, Snowflake, Zoom, American Superconductor, Urban Outfitters, and BJ's and Decker. So a lot of retail names. Ralph Lauren, Workday, and Copart. Biggest gainers on the week, CoreWeave on a huge earnings week, up 56%. NUTX up 44%. Rocket Labs continued. HIMS, Celestica continued up another 20%. Urban was a standout. ONON on earnings was a standout. Landbridge broke out this week, and Cloudflare. On the downside, we had a oddity, which their founder had an offering of 5.5 million shares, and he's cashing out, which sent that stock back from a pretty decent gain the prior week. This coming week's economic numbers on the light side, leading indicators on the 19th, and initial claims as usual, S&P Global Manufacturing PMI and Services PMI are the big ones out, as well as existing home sales and new home sales. Now let's go to the charts. The S&P 500, again, we can see the big gap up again, finally above all the shorter term moving averages, as well as the longer term moving averages, cleared the 40-week moving average and the 200-day moving average. 200-day moving average is now upward sloping, as we had 5 straight days of positive momentum for the week here, and now within 2 to 3% of all-time highs. NASDAQ also recovered all of its averages on a big volume week. Same thing, closed out the week at the highs. Qs equal weight, Q equal weight. Russells are still below the 200-day moving average, but broke out of this little flag this week. Still a ways to go, as the large cap and mega caps have led this rally, which is common. VIX down another 21% to 17.24 on the week. Should probably rise a little bit on Monday, but that's good to see. And the dollar index was up slightly on the week. The 30-year bond yields were slightly up on the week to 4.899, getting close to that 5% level. And the 10-year bond yields were up to 4.441%. Again, trading higher in the aftermarket last night. The TLT, which is the price of bonds, trading lower in the aftermarket. Bitcoin, a nice quiet week here since this beautiful multi-week tight on Bitcoin, which is unbelievable. 3 straight gains, approaching all-time highs with a quiet week of up 0.9%. Looking great there. Could get a benefit also from the downgrade. Semiconductors, this is the SOXX, which is most heavily weighted in Broadcom. This also reclaimed, or very close to reclaiming the 40-week, just shy of it, but basically right on the 200-day moving average. SMH is above the 200-day moving average, so that one is performing a little better. And gold, again, down about 4% on the week. Silver down 7% on the week. The gold miners down 8%. So we look at GLD, that closed right on the 50-day moving average and held, and that was trading higher in the aftermarket, close to the 300 level. So we'll see how that goes. Europe again, new highs, and the MAG's also recovering all of its moving averages on the week. MAG 7, Tesla being the standout, huge week. Again, looking at the week or the chart on the week, just again, gapped open above the 200-day moving average on a nice pocket pivot. Actually, that was Friday, and just continued throughout this week. Google still lagging. NVIDIA, again, recovering all of its short-term moving or long-term moving averages on the weekly and getting back above the 200-day. Now all moving averages are sloping upward, so it's a positive development for the semiconductor space. Microsoft continuing with a 3.5% gain on the week. Amazon also reclaimed all of its averages, and that was up 6.4% on the week. Apple up 6.4%, but still below its long-term averages. And Meta with an 8% gain on the week, continuing its earnings drive. And finally, getting into the watch list. Again, I sort by industry group ranking and go from there, just because it shows I believe you should stick in the top 30, 40 industry group ranks. The standout again this week being in the computer software and education area, Spotify with basically a 3-week tight formation here. Again, had a little bit of a shakeout on earnings, but still maintaining close to this pivot. Relative strength did pull back a little bit over the week before last, but still hanging in there in this big late stage double bottom base. Duolingo again with another 3% gain on the week. Netflix, probably one of the biggest liquid leaders of this current post follow through day rally. Up another 4% with a great showing. Boeing again kicking into this new stage 2 uptrend, up 5.6% on the week. In the aerospace defense area, Heiko, manufacturer of jet engines, which makes sense with Boeing, and ERJ doing very well and receiving a lot of orders, broke out of a stage 1 base this week. So this could be a new name to watch. ERJ, also a Brazilian aircraft manufacturer with a base building here. Again, it's been lagging Boeing, but has been a good runner here since 2023. Rocket Labs finally broke through and above the 200-day moving average, kicked out post earnings here the week before last, and continued making progress. LRN with a tight week that shouldn't be in here. Carpenter, a GROTECTION name, getting close to the 20% profit zone, which we are looking to just trade this name. ATI, again, similar name, also making progress. CrowdStrike recovered the previous week's losses. Again, seems to be lagging in the cyberspace, but several cyber names standing out, including Rubrik, which finally broke through the double bottom base pivot the week before last and made progress. Zscaler, one of the best names in the group, again, highlighted this nice little breakout here, and that's continuing. Okta also continued post week before last, pivot PM tight. GEV, one of our favored names in the data center, alternative energy, wind, solar, natural gas turbines, building a nice handle in this big cup base. Again, we're seeing a lot of names do this after a big move off the low. Again, big moves in these, time for rest, and these are acting perfectly with relative strength, making new highs. CEG, another name in that space. Oklo with a huge 34% gain on the week in the nuclear energy power plant area. Take Two, basically trading a 2-week tight. Roblox up 13% on the week. Mercado Libre getting close to the profit-taking zone. And one of the standouts here is Coupang breaking through pretty big levels here, going back multiple years, broke through that 2022 high this week. Again, after several bases here, this is finally breaking out. So this looks pretty interesting. Again, SE, Coupang, in the foreign online retail platform group. Chewy has been a standout, big recovery name. DoorDash sitting here again, back up in the pivot zone. Axon again hitting the buy point from this stage 1 cup base. Deere breaking out of this stage 1 this past week, up 7.8% on earnings. Toast, a name that unfortunately I did not buy on the gap up. Highly interested in this name. Looking at the monthly, approaching its all-time highs and trading for the last few weeks above its IPO price of $40. This one continues to make progress. Visa looking to break out potentially of the stage 2 base. Credo, again, this is a data center name. Earnings in a couple weeks, but recovered the 200-day. Now all moving averages are starting to slope upward on this name. This and A-Lab are looking good, which I'll go to. Dave continued to make progress. Celsius broke out through this little tight area we were talking about. Again, this 39.16 area this week. Trading very tight as they're digesting their new acquisition of Alania, which adds some breadth to their offerings, including protein drinks, as well as a continued line of energy drinks. Palantir, again, the liquid leader, up 10% on the week. GROTECTION name doing very well for us. SAP tight into the pivot zone. CoreWeave, new IPO that we've been talking about with a huge 56% gain this week. Snowflake with earnings coming out this upcoming week, building a new stage 1 base. Nutanix also broke out of the stage 1 base. This is a cloud provider in the software space. Again, this looks pretty decent. Twilio, I'm going to pass on this. It's not enough relative strength for my liking. Shopify broke into the higher end of the left side of this, or the right side of this base on earnings here, an earnings gap. Canadian company. Nebus, this is a hyperscaler, former Yandex from Russia that was spun off once the Russian stock market was shut off from the world. Earnings next week, but this had a big gap the week before last, and this is a name that could get going with some big triple-digit sales gains ahead for fiscal 2025, or calendar 2025, rather. Sprouts hanging in there. MicroStrategy down 3.9% again. This is a name building maybe a little bit of a handle here. TraderWeb with earnings just shy of stage 1 cup with handle. NRG with a big breakout on earnings this week and a new acquisition. again, in the electric utility area. Group quiet this week. Power continued building this Cup 1 base. In the building area, again, this is a big data center and power plant building group. Nice stage 2 base here. Earnings on the week and slightly shy of GROTECTION liquidity requirements, but a very nice base I wanted to show you this week. Vistera in the electric power continues to make progress. Robinhood with a nice 13% gain on the week again, building a handle potentially in this big double bottom cup base. This is a name we all own. And this is another stock I highlighted last week in the investment banking area, looking good. And another Brazilian company in the security brokerage area coming up through a new stage 2 uptrend. Again, gapped open here last week. Dutch Bros with a nice 16.22% gain. This is my second largest position in Toddzilla, and all of our portfolios own this. Darden Restaurants, again, we're seeing retail and restaurant names acting pretty well. Darden up 6% on the week. Also, a name I don't have in here, Shake Shack, looking pretty decent, but not qualifying yet. Few names in that area. Race continues to build its cup out. Tesla, again, the big standout, up 17%. Again, we talked about that on our Mag 7. And again, in the fertilizer area, this Mosaic, another 7% gain. Avgo, another 9% gain. A-Lab, big data center semiconductor play. Little bit of a delayed move post earnings, but gapped open on the news this past week of the NVIDIA Saudi deal here. So this group is starting to move again. And again, let's go back to A-Lab. Again, post DeepSeek, these stocks got crushed, but again, multiple quarters of triple-digit gains. Again, slowing down a little bit here, but still relatively cheap with that type of growth. This is another name. All right, in China, this is a big standout. Nice stage 3 base breakout in TME, Tencent Music. Again, teenager in the $15 price range, but nice gap on earnings. You're up 15.6%, closing at the top end of the range for the week on a nice breakout. Johnson Controls, another name in the building space, doing well. Ralph Lauren with earnings next week. Again, the retail group, a big standout this week with Ralph Lauren, one of the leading stocks in this group going into earnings, up 10%. PODD follow through this week in the insulin pump area, up another 4% on a monster earnings gap the week before. And again, Transmedics Group, this is a stock I took a position in Toddzilla this week as it was able to basically reclaim the high volume close on the week, the highest day here, trading very tight on Thursday and Friday. So this looks very good and has some decent earnings growth ahead. Boston Scientific, quieter name, but nice breakout this week. Another name that is premature, but again, wanted to highlight Supermicro. Huge winner back here. $20 billion contract with a $27 billion market cap. Pretty big deal here. Nice gap up on the week here. On that news, up 15% on Wednesday. Shook out below the gap on Thursday and then closed pretty well on the week on Friday. Again, always tough when the 200-day moving average is sloping down. It's going to take a while for this to build. You've got a lot of overhead resistance here, but this is a name that I'm watching. Corteva in the agricultural seed area with a stage 1 breakout on earnings the previous week and follow through this week. So this is a nice little base here. Again, broke out and held here for the past 2 weeks. Celestica, another name in the data center, which made progress this week with a nice gap up on the NVIDIA announcement and tight trading through the end of the week. So this looks good. Uber continued with a 10% gain. Again, this is in turbo and GROTECTION. Lyft, quiet week. Landbridge, again, this doesn't meet our liquidity requirements, but this is a nice big breakout this week in that stock. Carvana, again, in the liquid leader, up 11% on the week. Oscar Health, which is in the Toddzilla portfolio. Again, big gap up on earnings here. Again, this is a company that was started by Jared Kushner's brother. Kushner is married to one of Trump's daughters, and again, not related to Donald Trump per se, but in the family, and had an aunt show up on Monday here, or Tuesday rather. Again, this is a situation where you had a declining 200-day moving average coming into the earnings gap, gapped up, came back, kissed the 200-day, shook some of the gap buyers out, including myself here, which I had to stop at the low, bought it back as it reclaimed these lows or the highs of Thursday, as well as was able to close back above the high volume close day. So I find this an interesting play. Again, second biggest volume in its history and huge volume again this week. So I'm watching this name and in this name. Next tracker, big earnings breakout this week in the solar space. Definitely some standouts in the solar area. An EQT trading in a very nice flat base here, or actually not a flat base, but a consolidation. EQT is the largest U.S. natural gas producer, and their CEO recently went on the record stating that he believed that the growth in the data center, they were going to be the biggest provider of the fuel for the power generation of the data center energy complex. So again, this is an area we favor with our investment in GEV. EQT is the fuel for the turbines that GEV manufactures, and this is very close to a breakout. So again, very nice chart. 56, 66 alert set for the week. Urban Outfitters earnings next week. This, again, with a nice V-shaped recovery going into earnings with a breakout. So Urban and Ralph Lauren looking good heading into earnings. Gap also coming out with earnings in 2 weeks. So this space perked up nicely. AppLovin continuing this week. Amphenol in the data center connector space up 7%. Train in the cooling area of the data center up 6%. And Train also. And that is it for the weekend review. My name is Todd Thomas. My email is todd@revereasset.com. My Twitter handle is @ToddMichael70. If you'd like to become a client, our number is 855-REAL-WEALTH and ask to speak with Don Vandenborg or Dan Stewart. We appreciate it, and I look forward to next week's presentation.